lack of interesting details, gold bathrooms, kneeling servants even?
I think there was a fascinating amount of detail in Vytjie Mentor's testimony, but I think one of the most important aspects, of course, is that her evidence touches upon two major themes within the so-called state capture narrative that has captivated South Africa for so long. One, she alleges that Ajay Gupta effectively told her that the family intended to be the sole or main supplier of uranium to government's nuclear build program, which of course has been a huge theme of discussion within South Africa for at least the past few years. And two, that, prior to them allegedly being involved in a massive kickback deal with South China Rail, they were on, Dudizane Zuma and Rajesh Gupta were on a plane with her to China in 2010 in terms of a crucial state visit that President Jacob Zuma paid to the Chinese government. So two big themes in that evidence, but of course the main aspects that I think captivated public imagination were the gold bathrooms, the difference in obesity between the two Gupta brothers, and Vytjie Mentor's various observations about not only the Sahara offices, which she described as very shabby, but of course Saxonwold itself.
Karyn, so let's get to some of that detail, but starting in China. So there was testimony that she was going to be taken to see President Jacob Zuma. Let's just start there, because she's going to visit a state president, but she was terrified, she says.
This was fascinating because essentially she had this quite strange encounter on her version with President Jacob Zuma's son, Dudizane, again, as in the testimony of Ngabisi Jonas, a key sort of playmaker within the Gupta empire, someone who'd approached her on a first-class plane to China via Dubai, introduced her, of course, to, on her version, Vytjie, the same controversial arms deal advisor who is at the helm or center of Ngabisi Jonas's allegations that the Guptas attempted to bribe him in the presence of Dudizane Zuma and Vytjie. She then is approached, he introduces her to Rajesh Gupta, she believes, who boasts about the fact that his brother is part of the sort of team, the advanced team, as he puts it, that is going to China before then President Jacob Zuma does. She then has this strange encounter in her hotel where this Gupta brother phones her and informs her that the president wants to see her. She said, having no knowledge of who exactly this person was, and also later adding that she feared she feared the president's reputation, quote unquote, in terms of women. She turns down this invitation only to be confronted with, as she says, a great deal of aggression from this alleged Gupta brother, who tells her he's going to phone the president and subsequently tells her the president wants to see her. So very much a strange set of testimony that she gives that, if true, would suggest that the Gupta family were not only pulling in the strings in South Africa, but were effectively key players in international visits in which billions of rands of investment were discussed and actively dealt with.
Yeah, incredible. It seemed like they were in charge, according to that. Karyn, stay with us. So let's fast forward and we get to the crux of her testimony, what the Gupta family wanted from her later regards uranium. Let's take a listen. All right, I was hoping to bring you about uranium. So Karyn, just talk about that, because that was crucial. The idea has always been that nuclear would be the culmination of the state capture project, and she got to the heart of that.
Remember, of course, Francis, that this alleged encounter occurred in 2010. So we're talking about nearly a decade ago, eight years ago, where the Gupta family, while on the sort of periphery of public imagination, were certainly not at the epicenter of the so-called state capture narrative that has so gripped South Africa. But on Vytjie Mentor's version, she meets Ajay Gupta in Saxonwold prior to her meeting with her scheduled meeting with then President Jacob Zuma. he starts discussing with her about the fact that she is from the Northern Cape, which of course is a uranium-dense province, and tells her that the pebble bed modular reactor, which she had very much been pushing for as a project, was essentially burning money on his version, and she must totally forget about it. He then tells her that the family, will be the main supplier of uranium to government's nuclear build program, all of which were she said that she disagreed with Ajay Gupta's perceptions of the pebble bed modular reactor and its usefulness within South Africa. But she was also staggered by the fact, as she told the commission, that he appeared to know what she had been trying to meet with former President Jacob Zuma about, and that was really this issue of nuclear power and, of course, the Northern Cape's relationship to that, given the fact that it was such a uranium-dense province.
All right, so let's stay with the crux. Also, that she was offered a ministerial position in return for cutting an SAA route in favor of a jet link. Here's where she asks Ajay Gupta how that would be possible. Let's listen.
He said I could be minister. I said, how so? He said the president was going to reshuffle his cabinet in the recent future, and Minister Barbara Hogan was going to be reshuffled, and I could become the minister in her place when she's reshuffled if I agree that once I become the minister, I would abolish the SAA South Africa, India, South Africa route.
So, Karyn, are there echoes there of Jonas's testimony or anything else we've heard about alleged state capture?
I think that's very much, that's an interesting observation to make, because there are echoes. There's the suggestion, Jonas alleging this huge amount. He was offered this huge amount of 600 million. He was told you can put 600,000 rand in a bag and take it from here. We can't work with Nhlanhla Nene, who was then the finance minister, but we want to be able to work with you. This idea that, these brothers, on the version of these two witnesses, which of course we expect to be disputed very heavily by the Guptas themselves and Duduzane Zuma, not to mention the former president. They very much paints a picture of a family that felt deeply emboldened to effectively, tell individuals that they were in line for ministerial positions. And I think the disturbing aspect, which, these allegations do not come out of nowhere. In the case of Des van Rooyen, for example, Nhlanhla Nene was removed for that 4-day period, and Des van Rooyen did replace him with, as we've seen from the Gupta leaks and a huge amount of other evidence, two individuals that were aligned and were advisors or aligned to the Guptas and served as Mr. van Rooyen's advisors. In the case of Ms. Mentor, of course, Barbara Hogan was removed and subsequently replaced by Malusi Gigaba. Minister Gigaba will very much vociferously deny that he was part of any kind of state capture project. But it's fascinating to see how these individuals say that the Gupta family, on their version, had in-depth knowledge that these cabinet reshuffles were imminent and had very definitive objectives in terms of finding ministers that could serve their business interests when the ministers that were being reshuffled could be replaced. So it's becoming increasingly important, I think, for the Gupta family, Duduzane Zuma, and former President Jacob Zuma, most centrally, to try to explain those kind of allegations away or deal with them, lest that the normal South African is left with the impression that for that season, at the very least, this family was essentially acting as a president.
On a lighter note, unlike Jonas, she was trying to come up with ways to distinguish between the Gupta brothers.
Yes, I think this was one of the lightest moments of the entire hearing. We know that there has been confusion with which Guptas, in Kabisi Jonas's evidence as well. She gave a hilarious observation about how she managed to differentiate between Ajay and Atul, most notably around their girth. I don't want to be accused of fat shaming here, so I won't say what she said.
All right. At the end, there was a long discussion on cross-examination. That interrupted her testimony. Is that matter now clarified, Karyn?
No, I think that this, we heard from Vincent Maleka, the advocate, that he felt that if people were going to bring applications to cross-examine witnesses, and I would imagine very notably, the Gupta family, Duduzane Zuma, former President Jacob Zuma, they needed to be prepared to provide a version, but also to understand that they would be required potentially to testify and face cross-examination themselves. The DCJ, Raymond Zondo, in charge of the entire hearing, suggesting that, would they be compelled to give evidence? That was really the question that he asked. But Maleka making it very clear that, if you provided a version, that version needed to be tested. And it's very obvious that, from his side, he believes that people who do make applications for cross-examination should be prepared to testify themselves. I think, Francis, that issue is going to be clarified tomorrow morning, where I expect we will hear or get some finality about whether the former president, the Guptas, or Duduzane Zuma are going to bring those applications to cross-examine the witnesses.
All right, and what do you expect from Vytjie Mentor herself and going forward for the rest of the week?
Well, the most important thing, of course, is that she's going to give evidence about, her informing former President Jacob Zuma about this alleged effort to offer her this ministerial position. We know, and what his reaction was to that. Does she go into any further detail than what has already been canvassed so thoroughly in the public discourse? We also know that Themba Maseko, the former head of government's GCIS communications department, is expected to testify on Friday to give evidence about how he says the Gupta family tried to pressure him into channeling advertising to their various media organizations. And of course, his interaction with the president in terms of that alleged effort to channel this advertising to their companies. We also expect that Pumla Williams, who was his deputy at the time, will also be called to testify in regard to that particular evidence.
All right, thank you very much, Karyn Maughan, Tiso Blackstar, senior legal journalist. So more to come. We've already heard about the gold bathrooms, allegations that the Guptas were basically in control of a state trip to China.